Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We're excited for you to be joining us today for our sixth Growth Hour webinar from Shed Advisor, talking today about business with purpose. My name is Audrey Smith, and I will serve as your moderator for today. If you have any comments or questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to enter them in the chat box. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So for those of you on the phone or on the Zoom at all, you may simply unmute and ask us directly. Now, please let me introduce our host today. Steve Byler is a certified speaker and coach with Maxwell Leadership and a certified EOS implementer who assists leaders and leadership teams in getting clear with their vision in order to get more of what they really want from their business. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Audrey. Always good to be with you.
I also have the pleasure of introducing our guest today, Titus Kuepfer. In 2018, Titus emptied out his savings account to start Eden Lawn Care. After growing the company for 6 years, he sold half of it and moved to India to help start Prosynergy Bookkeeping. Prosynergy has been growing rapidly and now includes 10 team members in 2 locations. Titus is passionate about entrepreneurship for the higher purpose of reducing suffering and restoring human flourishing. Welcome, Titus. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Audrey. It's great to be here.
Hey, Titus, it's good to see you again. And just in full disclosure, Titus and I work together a bit in their business endeavors, and it's been a real delight to me getting to know Titus and his team in India. And one of the things that in getting to know Titus and his team that really stood out to me was the passion they have for business because of a purpose that undergirds the business that they're involved in. And those of you that know EOS, which is the kind of operating system in business that I work in closely day in and day out, one of the things that we look to find and identify for every business leader and their team is why do they do what they do? And typically this why is not so much about the niche that they're in, whether it's storage sheds or finance or whatever the kind of aspect of business that they work in, but there's a deeper why behind it that's tied to a higher purpose, a purpose that is bigger than themselves, a purpose that is bigger than the business, and a purpose that really often could work in many different industries. It just happens to be, in this case for Titus, bookkeeping. It probably was the same purpose when he was in the lawn care business. A purpose, I found that when I'm working in the world of sheds, which I still do somewhat, the same purpose fuels my passion there as fuels my passion when I work with leadership teams in coaching and helping them facilitate growing excellent companies. And all of us have some sort of deep purpose that's kind of down inside the core of who we are. And it finds its meaning outside of who we are, and it fuels our passion for what we do. The challenge that many of us have is knowing what that purpose is, discovering it. And it's hard because it's actually hard work. It's not just head work. And yet we have to use our heads with clear thinking and great questions to discover what the passion is in our hearts. And so, I've worked hard at developing my skills around this. And to be honest, I'm still not very good at it. So I'm really excited about this conversation here today with Titus, and also any questions that the rest of you might have as we get further into this webinar. How do we identify our purpose, that higher purpose that keeps us going when things are easy, that keeps us going when things are hard, that gets us out of bed when we know when we go to work, it's going to be a really tough day because we've got some hard decisions to make in business. What is that passion, that purpose, that cause that's underneath all of our activities and really fuels the fire? And probably a person in recent history who's popularized kind of at least the awareness of this purpose is Simon Sinek and his TED Talk, Start With Why. And another one that has been a big one for me, Ricardo Semler, a Brazilian entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, brilliant entrepreneur. One of the tools to his success, he said, is learning to ask the question why 5 times, not just 3. And we'll always start with kind of the peripheral why. The peripheral why gets us the peripheral answer. We have to keep digging, keep digging, keep digging. And so that's what we're on about here today. How do we discover that why? How do we find the purpose? And so, again, delighted to have you with us today, Titus. And let's just kind of dive into, can you just give us what you have kind of currently defined as your purpose, knowing it kind of evolves over time, but what is the passion that undergirds the work that you're doing currently?
Yeah, so our company has a mission statement, and it is we create value to reduce suffering and restore human flourishing. And we've had several different iterations of that, but and it still feels a little wordy to me, but that's about as much as we could boil it down to. So the create value part is where we are serving our clients. That's the client facing part of our mission statement. We really want to offer something that helps business owners get financial clarity, run their business as well. But the reason we want to do that ultimately is because we want to reduce suffering in the world. At first, we were toying around with the phrase "end suffering," and we realized we probably couldn't do that. But hey, we can all reduce suffering wherever we find it, and business is a tool to do that. And then ultimately restore human flourishing. And this comes from a biblical worldview that says that the world was created perfect in the Garden of Eden, that was the ultimate place of human flourishing, and that's been broken, and we see so much suffering in the world. And ultimately, we are working together with God to restore the universe, the creation, back to its intended design. And so everything we do, including business, is with that ultimate goal. So yeah, we can drill down into what that looks like here in India. But yeah, that's kind of the overarching purpose for why we're doing what we're doing.
So we noted this a bit earlier, Titus, but you spent a significant chunk of your childhood in Africa. And
Yes.
do you think do you think that situation or that experience had anything to do with kind of shaping and forming this kind of burning passion inside of you?
Yeah, that's interesting. It probably did. Like most teenagers, I didn't want to do what my dad had done. So when I was 2 years old, my family moved to Kenya, and we were there for 10 years, moved back to the States when I was 12. And so I never wanted to do that. I wanted to stay in the States and, I don't know, get into music or whatever unrealistic dreams teenagers have. Um, but it was really around age 18 and 19 when I started learning more about the desperate needs of the world, and suffering. And there's suffering all throughout the world, but in the developing world, the sort of physical suffering many people endure, that I decided, hey, this is something I want to give my life to. And but I'm sure, having grown up in Kenya, that had an impact on that decision. Um, Whether it was just the fact that I'm comfortable as a third culture person, I'm comfortable in foreign countries. I'm sure that experience shaped it a lot. But yeah, I kind of had to come to that on my own terms as an adult, to really pick up that, I guess, legacy that my dad laid down for me.
And I note when I'm working with leadership teams and we're trying to explore uh, what the passion is that's really carrying them on, what's the passion that kind of motivated them to start their business, what keeps them going when they're tough. One of the things I listen for is the stories they tell, and not just the stories they tell, but the stories then their leadership teams tell about these people. And those stories are often clues to where this passion comes from and what has kind of shaped it and defined it. And I know childhood stories often are a part of it. They might be a positive contributor or a negative contributor. In other words, the passion is and is antithetical to
Right.
a childhood experience. So deep poverty themselves might lead to flourishing, but often our stories are clues to what we're really passionate about. So I've found some of the same experiences myself. So talk a little bit about, when did you first really observe poverty?
Yeah, definitely growing up, we would have street kids come up all the time and beg from us. And, it's a lot different when it's a child coming up to you and asking for food or for money. In the States, we have a lot of homeless people, and it's a big problem as well. But when it's a child, it really messes with you, and it feels different. It is different. It's a very different reality, for a child to be on the streets versus an adult. And so, yeah, growing up, definitely saw a lot of that. I think when you're young and you see it regularly, you can kind of build a I don't know, a insensitivity toward it.
Yeah.
That probably happened when I was young. And then, of course, having spent my teen years in the States, was kind of insulated from that. But coming back to India, I first traveled to India when I was 19. I'll tell a few stories. The first one, I remember I was in Andhra Pradesh, and I was in a village, and there was a lot of kids working in the mango orchards, and just realizing that they had to do that instead of going to school, so that their parents, or so their families, would have enough to eat. That was one of the first times when it really became real to me. And then on another more recent trip to India, there was an experience where we were in the middle of Delhi. And if you've been to Delhi, there's no place like Delhi on earth. It is the one of the wildest cities, with the biggest sensory overload that you could imagine. And so we were there, and we had just gone into a big indoor mall, and India has the biggest malls, at least four to five times bigger than anything I've seen in the States. And I haven't been to Mall of America, but they're massive and they're really nice. So I believe we had just been in one of these malls, and we were outside of this glitzy mall waiting for our cab. And this little girl came up to me, and she was trying to sell roses. And this is something the kids often do, or the people on the streets often do, is it's the psychology. If you can offer something, then people will be more likely to give you money. And so she was selling roses. She had to be around 6 or 7 years old. And for a lot of these kids, there are gangs who control them in these big Indian cities, and who take all their money. I mean, they'll take care of them at night, but they're often abused in these situations, and basically they're slaves. And so I knew that, and I didn't want to give her money. Um, and so I was like, no, I don't. And you're bombarded with so many of these people, that it's like you kind of get used to just saying no. So I was saying, no, I don't want to buy it. And she just kept begging and begging for me to buy it. She put the rose in my hand and like forced me to hold it. And just around that time, our cab got there. And so I'm trying to push the rose back into her hand, and she was just grabbing my hand and like trying to force me to keep me from doing that. She was so strong for her age. And in that moment, I think it was the juxtaposition of this beautiful little girl and this beautiful rose, and the absolute horror of the situation she was in. That juxtaposition hit me so hard in that moment. And so experiences like that, um, are why, I mean, it's why I live where I do. And not all of India is in poverty, obviously, but there is a lot of desperate poverty here. But it also gives me a sense of purpose. Like, I want my company to succeed, so that we can, well, first of all, and we'll get into this later, I'm sure, first of all, provide employment opportunities for people, so that this cycle doesn't continue, but also so we can fund community development projects here in India with the profits of our company. And that's just such an exciting vision, especially when you live right here and you see the needs, to be able to go to work every day knowing, hey, like if I'm successful, if I lead this organization well, we can do more work in the slums of the cities, and help more of these children and adults. So yeah.
So excellent story there. And, you can feel the heart tug in the story, because it's a real a situation of desperation. And then while we can't solve all those and you can't solve all those problems, you can contribute to some people experiencing some flourishing. And
Right.
I'm particularly curious now in your choice of the word flourishing. It's been honestly, it's been one of my favorite words for 25 years, but it keeps being redefined for me. So
Hmm.
when you talk about reducing poverty, you gave us a great story there. How do you envision flourishing? What do you see when you see flourishing as the outcome of your work?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting question because a lot of people who are in desperate poverty seem to be pretty happy and they are flourishing. So it's not just about material wealth, certainly. And the human, like humans are very resilient. We adapt to whatever situations we're in pretty well. But I would say like um, we're complex, we are spiritual, we are physical. So spiritually, I would say having a restoration of our relationship with God. That's extremely important. That's the most important thing. And then materially, having at least our basic needs met. So I'm forgetting who it was, but there's been studies done about happiness, and I believe there was one study that said that there's a certain threshold of basic needs that need to be met before people are able, for the most part, to live a happy life.
Yeah.
Food, shelter, clothing. Yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Right.
is one of those
Right.
studies. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so having at least the opportunities where if those opportunities are available for people to do meaningful work so that they can have those needs met, I would say that's foundational for flourishing. And then beyond that, um, man, there's so many other things. Um, just having the concept of delayed gratification, making healthy choices, not staring at your phone all day. I mean, but a lot of that's kind of within the realm of our personal choice, right? And our personal discipline. So um, having opportunities, enough opportunities to meet to have meaningful work that will meet our family's basic needs, where everyone can have those opportunities, that's often outside of people's control
Yeah.
in the developing world. And so that's the part of that I think that we can make a difference. That's a piece that we can offer, is that part of human flourishing is lacking in so many places. And so the work we're doing in India is to help people find those opportunities and have that opportunity to flourish materially, and then of course spiritually as well. And I'm going to be careful about how I talk about the spiritual side of things, because it's really sensitive in the country I live. And so just so any of the audience members, if you want to know why I'm choosing the words I'm using, it's because it's yeah, very sensitive for my neighbors here.
Yeah. And I would just note when we talk about purpose, and particularly an activity or a life with purpose, when our sense of purpose is not significantly outside of ourselves and often far beyond ourselves, it doesn't really motivate and inspire us.
Hmm.
And so purpose is almost always in the spiritual category of our humanity, because it's how we attach to something, connect to something far bigger than just the material world, because the material world ultimately does disappoint. Where does love, where does passion, and all those kinds of big words, where does that come from? And what do we love? Our loves inspire our purpose. So it is often in that spiritual dimension. So I want to note something here as well. You talk about poverty. There's this form of spiritual poverty, and whatever your religious kind of perspective is, a spiritual poverty has to do with a lack of higher purpose.
Right.
And so when we find higher purpose, it's usually tied to us being spiritual beings. And this is
Right.
pretty much true across all world religions. The material side is pretty fundamental, right? Because if we're dying of thirst and from harsh conditions, there's this little desperate fringe that seeks spiritual awareness, but we're so consumed by material need that we
Right.
really can't think well and process well, and we struggle in those spaces. And then there's
Yeah.
also, I think, the emotional and mental spaces that really tie into human flourishing as well. There are people who have all the money in the world, materially well off, and can be spiritually impoverished, so not flourishing around their purpose, or can be mentally anguished and in distress, or
Right.
emotionally bankrupt. And so
Yeah.
all of those things really have to be a part of flourishing. And sometimes there's a first and a second that has to be dealt with. I'm just reminded, um, Jesus is quoted as saying a cup of cold water. Sometimes when that's the most urgent thing you need, if you talk to them about anything else other than the cup of cold water, you're wasting your human energy. So
Right.
how do we do that in business? Now, where I'm going with this, Titus, is so now in your personal life, okay, so you actually live in India where some of these needs are more publicly on display than other parts of the world. How do
Mhm.
you, how does your purpose, and I'd like for you to reiterate your purpose one more time, and then tell us, how does it impact your daily life? How does it impact how you hire people, how you manage people, as in inspire people in your business, and then how you market and run your business, because they really are all tied into everything you do once you get clear on what your purpose is. So just explore maybe how that impacts your life day in and day out, including your
Sure.
business.
Yeah. So the purpose statement again is create value to reduce suffering and restore human flourishing. So I think it's really underestimated how important a great job is in someone's life. Like how much of a difference a wonderful work environment, a kind boss, and meaningful work is in really transforming someone's life. And so yeah, the create value piece of it is we want to offer the best bookkeeping service to US companies. And that's really important to us too, not just so that we can get more clients, but we believe that that in itself is something that glorifies God, and that it's why we're created. It's why we're on earth, is to take the raw potential of the universe and create something beautiful out of it. And whether that's someone's messy QuickBooks file to make it a thing of beauty, I mean, that's ultimately what humans we're designed to do. That's what Adam and Eve were designed to do, is take the raw potential of the universe and take it towards a garden city, as John Mark Comer put it. So yeah, that's the create the value piece. There is core to what we're doing. But then also for our employees, um, Indian work culture can be really tough. Um, it's it's all about hierarchy and climbing up the ladder. And man, it's a 6-day work week, sometimes 7 days. If your boss tells you to stay late, you just have to do it. It can be really, really tough, even for people in professional spaces. So offering a work environment where, we have a 2-day weekend. We offer benefits, like things like we have lunch together. We provide lunch for our employees, and giving our employees opportunities to grow professionally. So we will pay for courses if they want to take further training. We pay for that. We try to give them enough margin to where they can continue developing professionally. We give them responsibilities beyond what they think they're able to take on, and it really pushes them to grow and to realize, hey, like if I really set my mind to this, I can accomplish anything. And we really try to create an environment of curiosity. So always being curious and solving problems independently rather than just going to your supervisor. So a lot of these values that even in the West, they're countercultural, but certainly over here, and our company's still pretty young. So I think the jury's still out if we'll be successful in creating that kind of work environment. But we have heard from our senior employee, our head of operations, that, yeah, this has been an amazing experience for him. And so, yeah, treating our employees really, really well. There's just, I even in the States, I hear it so often about bosses who just try to squeeze every bit of work out of their employees and pay them as little as possible. And it's just not necessary when the company owner is making good money. And you won't attract the best people doing that. It doesn't even make business sense. So yeah, restoring human flourishing by creating an amazing work environment, that's part of it. But then also with our profits, we're funding different community development projects like sewing centers where women from the slums are able to come and learn how to sew and for their families and maybe even start a business sewing. We've got a computer literacy center where young people come and get computer skills. There's a tuition center for kids where they come because the government schools are pretty dismal. So kids from the slums who can only afford government school, which is free, they come after school and can get a decent education with this tuition program. These aren't all, we didn't start all of these, but we help support it with our profits. Things like that is as our company scales, we want to keep financially supporting initiatives like that more and more. So yeah, I don't know if that directly answered your question as far as like how we handle how this affects all of our business operations. I think I'll have to think about that more. Maybe as my coach, you can tell me.
So I love the illustrations you gave there, Titus. I think one of the things I'd just really like to impress on entrepreneurs here is that there is a mindset, at least in American culture, that the primary purpose business serves is to generate profits and then to give profits away to some quote higher cause.
Mm.
Okay. And I strongly resist that simplistic metaphor that it's about giving profits away. In other words, business finds its purpose there. Being
Right.
involved in business myself for many years, I can't count the number of times at our annual Christmas party or summer party where not only the employees were together, but spouses and children of employees were all a part of an event where spouses would come to me and say, we just want you to know how much we appreciate the work culture that you've created for our spouse. They're a different person when they come home than they used to be at their old job. And the work culture is so formative. You think about most people spend more waking hours in their workplace than they do with their immediate families. And when you're in a stressed workplace that does not facilitate health, and not just physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health and flourishing, it's hard to recover from that in your weekend and your off hours between job. You carry that stressful existence right back with you into your home, which drags the energy down of your home, destroys your energy over the weekend, and makes you dread going back to work on Monday. Okay, and if you can create a culture inside your business, inside the circle of your influence. So let's be honest. You say, well, I'm not the owner of my business, so I can't do it. Well, what about the people you touch inside your business? How can you begin to be that kind of source of flourishing, generosity, open-hearted compassion, whatever the, kind of the traits we might describe? How can you start being that sort of person and creating that kind of culture? And one of my favorite works, and I can't believe I haven't promoted this more recently again. There's the Acton Institute created a DVD video movie back probably 10, 15 years ago now called The Call of the Entrepreneur. And I don't know if you've seen that or not, Titus. You really ought to watch it. It was fuel on my fire as an entrepreneur. And he tells the story. The Acton Institute really interviews three different entrepreneurs. One of them, a Midwest farmer. One of them, a banker in New York City, and another one, a Chinese entrepreneur. So very, very different contexts, and how their vision for their work as entrepreneurs contributed to human flourishing. And when we have a zero-sum game, we see business as war. But when we see business as the opportunity to create and build value, an expansive kind of value that not only in the financial world, but in the social space, in the human relational space, in the individuals expanding themselves, growing as individuals, then business can absorb this passion, as you describe it, against the negative, dealing with human poverty and suffering, but really creating this kind of flourishing that is inspired by hope and a high sense of purpose, and incrementally, little by little, helps people to expand the scope of their lives into places of flourishing. So I love what you said, and I'll just reiterate. I think Amazon actually has it available on Prime, The Call of the Entrepreneur, and one of my highlights, and this is a real sidebar here, but I was in Grand Rapids for a business, sitting with a board after our board meeting in a restaurant in downtown Grand Rapids, and I heard this voice behind me, and I recognized it as the narrator of the movie The Call of the Entrepreneur. And I looked at the person across the table from me. I didn't want to just crane my neck around. I said, "Is that a Catholic priest behind me with a bald head and probably pushing 70?" And they said, "How'd you know that?" I said, "It's got to be Father Robert Sirico. He's the narrator of the movie The Call of the Entrepreneur." And they said, "Well, that's probably who it is then." So I had to get up right there, and I turned around and I had a wonderful conversation with Father Robert Sirico. But it was an incredible moment. And the other thing I would just note here is the Chinese entrepreneur that he interviewed in that movie is today in prison in Hong Kong for refusing to stop using his business as this place of human flourishing. And so he's now felt as a threat. And so he's still imprisoned, and the Acton Institute is working to just publish his case to try to get more publicity in that space. And it's work with purpose. And it's a very, very worthwhile. And again, in the United States, one of the negative images, and I tell business owners this jokingly, I said, the average church in America, when they have a successful entrepreneur in the church, the main thing they want them for is their wallets. Let's extract as much money as we can from these people. And what they don't realize is that often this entrepreneur is out up to his neck in water, in the ocean. The tides are coming and going. He's fighting for his life. He's fighting for his very survival in trying to sustain his enterprise. And the pastor's pacing up and down on the beach said, "Can somebody get his wallet before he drowns?" Instead of taking care of the entrepreneur. Okay, it's a tragic image, but it kind of is, unfortunately, how business is often seen. And maybe as entrepreneurs, we're as responsible for that as anything, because we've made it all about the money sometimes. But entrepreneurship with purpose, as you're describing it, transforms not only the communities in which they flourish, but the very people who are involved in it. So let's just take this personally a bit. How does this passion impact the way you personally do life? Maybe with your family, and even when you maybe take a vacation.
Yeah. So outside of business, is that your question?
Outside of business. So I'm testing, is it really your passion, or is it just a badge you're putting on your business for some reason? I know better, but
No. Well, I think that, how we spend our free time does say a lot about us. and I'm as guilty as anyone of just vegging after work with Netflix or on my phone. But it's really exciting to be in India where there's so many opportunities, and one really great opportunity right next to our house, like 5 minutes from our house. And I mentioned this already, is a tuition center for kids from the slums. And so we're able to go there like several nights a week, and we do group games with the young people, teach them a Bible story, do worship with them, and so that's been really exciting to get to know these kids from these underprivileged homes. And so, yeah, I would say that's part of it. Um, I did want to circle back around to what you were saying earlier, if you don't mind, because I
Sure.
felt like I think you were pushing back on maybe the last part of what I was saying, where I was going down this list of like, okay, here's what all our business can do with our profits. And I'm actually very thankful for that, because I'm sort of a recovering Gnostic, where I certainly used to view the world in very much as like in a dualistic way, separating everything spiritual from the physical. And I would go to work, and this was before I was a business owner, but I would go to work so that I could have enough money to go and do the meaningful stuff in my free time. And work was this necessary evil. I hated it. Um, and I remember there was one moment when I was doing lawn care at the time for someone else, and I was weed eating some really overgrown grass, and it was awful and it was hot. But I was listening to the Bible Project podcast, and Tim Mackey and John Collins they were going through, the first few chapters of Genesis, which is Tim Mackey's favorite part of the Bible, and talking about why humans were created in the first place. And we're often taught that humans were created to have a relationship with God. That's not in the first few pages of the Bible. It's true, and there was a relationship there, but I think what's often missed is the nature of that relationship. So it was a vocational relationship in which human beings were essentially created as God's subcontractors. So God created this beautiful world, and he created humans to take care of it, to be his subs, um, to implement his rule and reign in a way that brings flourishing and brings abundance and takes the human project somewhere. And I don't think it was supposed to stay a garden. It was they were supposed to create civilization, create something beautiful. And of course it all went wrong. But as I was listening to this, and as I was unhappily doing my job, I suddenly realized that weed eating this overgrown field is exactly why I was created. I'm not created to do this necessary evil and then go use my free time to do something meaningful. And that really was a transformational moment for me. And I think it's still a struggle to continue to like have my mind renewed by that reality. But yeah, definitely like the work we do, the way we treat our team members, the way we treat customers when they're annoying, or vendors, the way we treat everyone that we come in contact with. And not just that, not just the people side of it, but the actual work, like
Yeah.
doing the work itself really, really well. And not just so you can get a great 5-star review on Google or get more customers. That's a byproduct. But doing the work really well is we are ultimately fulfilling, like I think on a really core level, the reason why we were created. When we do that work really well, in fellowship with God and with those around us. That's why humans were created. And so often that's missed when we just view work as a means to an end, whether it's just, I like as an employee, I want to get to my weekend, or as a business owner, I want to make a ton of money so I can either give it away, which is more noble than spending it on ourselves, but it's still not, it's still, you're missing something if that's the only,
Right.
goal there. Yeah.
And I appreciate you coming back to that. It's a piece that I care about pretty passionately. And at the risk of, going off track here, I want to note that, and maybe this is Pastor Steve showing up. who I thought retired back a few years ago. But the Genesis passage, the two words that are used in that story, I think it's King James is to dress and to keep.
Right.
Okay, those two words are priestly words. They only show up again in priestly roles. So you're tending and caring. Okay, so you're actually nurturing, cultivating, and expanding the garden into the wilderness. It's a priestly role that we have as entrepreneurs, in a sense, in the world. Get one of my recent books that I've just found and actually heard him talk and then bought the book, and I don't think I've read the book. You know, this is classic, but it's on the shelf. There's a guy, his name will come to me, Marcus Buckingham, and I think it's Love Works, I think might be the title of the book. But he did this huge research project with thousands of employees in many different countries around the world. And the quest for meaningful work is really kind of front and center for a lot of millennials and younger Gen Zers. It really matters. But we attach sometimes too much significance to the thing itself rather than finding the love and the meaning in the work that's in front of us. So it becomes this quest for a perfect career, the perfect job.
Yeah.
Okay. And most of us don't find that till we're in our 50s, unfortunately. You know, I think I've kind of found it if I can hang on to my energy long enough now to actually enjoy it. But he notes, Marcus notes, that it's not so much the job itself, but you need to find something inside that job, because all jobs have this kind of arduous, painful side to them, right? They're hard. That's why you get paid. You get paid because it's hard work. Pardon me. But he noted that people who find love in the work only need about 20% of their time to be doing what they truly love, to absolutely love their job. But they have to be able to identify that 20% and then really let the love flow in that 20%. And they need to have a little bit of it every day. In other words, you can't absolutely loathe your work 4 days a week, have one day that you love what you do. But most people, when they start paying attention to what their purpose is, why do I feel like I'm alive and on planet Earth? Me personally, based on my experiences, my gifts, my abilities, and what is it I can bring to the world that just expands human flourishing rather than help shrivel it up? Okay, what can I do for this expansiveness? And then I can find the love in that space, and I can do a little bit of it every day. And one of the stories I love that he tells, housekeeping in a hotel. You know, it's a low-end job, right? But he interviewed a whole bunch of the best reviewed housekeepers in Disney, in the hotels that in Disney in Florida. And one of the stories, he asks her, so why do you love your job? It's obvious you love it. And he notes that on a scale of 1 to 5, if you say you like your job, typically the energy that your body produces at the word like, on a scale of 1 to 5, is about a full 1. Okay, it's not much. We're still just surviving. As soon as you use the term, I love what I do, it goes from 1 to 5. So that love versus like is where the passion shows up. Right. And he say it only needs to be a few moments, but you've got to feel it, because that's where all that you've created to be, your gifts, your passions, your abilities, all flow into that one moment. And you know that you're fully alive, tied to your purpose. And this one lady, she said, well, here's the moment for me. Every room. She said, I've cleaned the room. I've got everything tidied in place. And as I finish it up, I'm backing out of the room, vacuuming in perfectly straight stripes, so that my last look in the room is I look in and the carpet has perfect rows of vacuum cleaner stripes in the carpets. And she said, it's just that moment of pride. It's like, wow. And she said, I intentionally enjoy that moment every room before I close the door. Yeah. And people sometimes notice when they walk in. Some people don't notice, but some people do. And they say, somebody was paying attention. Just that little extra. Another lady said, I'm not sure Disney will like it if they find out what I do, but my guests love it. So families, at a theme park, and most kids day one will buy some, a Mickey and a whatever the animals are that they love, stuffed animals. And when she finishes cleaning the room, she'll set up scenes with their animals. And she said, I just love it because I know it's going to bring them an incredible amount of joy when they walk in and see these little scenes of animals that they have she set them up, and she loved that moment.
Yeah.
And so any job, however distasteful the work itself might be, when you know what your purpose is and you bring that purpose into the kind of nasty side of that work, it's possible to become fully alive in those moments. And the contribution you bring to the world from that passion, from that sense of purpose, brings an expansiveness to the human experience. And that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for when we identify our purpose. And it can be emptying septic tanks. It can be, weed eating vast overgrown things on a 95-degree Virginia summer day. So I went off. You're the guest. You're supposed to be talking a little bit more, but I'm gonna give you another leading question here and maybe explore it. When you're in business, we care for our employees, so we try to build a culture. We want to have impact that's larger than business, so we want to deal with our profits well. Be sure that they are invested both first, usually in the growth of the health of the business, so we can provide more resource, greater benefit, more flourishing for the people directly involved in building this company. And then also investors, other vendors that serve us. We want to have impactful relationships that help them flourish. We don't want to, be sucking them dry to be successful ourselves. But particularly in your business, you also have this long-term relationship with clients.
Mhm.
And you hinted at this a little earlier, but how does the actual work you do? So tell us why bookkeeping. And usually that's not your first love, is my guess, but it's a thing.
Mhm.
But why bookkeeping? And then how can excellent bookkeeping services actually bring flourishing to your clients?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we were thinking of moving to India, we had a couple different ideas, and my older brother Tim is my business partner. And there was another family that moved with us as well. And so we had a couple different ideas, and um, but we really sort of settled on we need to find some kind of service where we can serve US clients with Indian talent. And that's not a new concept, outsourcing, obviously, but because we didn't have anyone in the States that was financially supporting us, we knew we needed to have a company that would pay our bills. And also to get the long-term visas there's a minimum salary requirement in India for that that's pretty high. At least if we would have been serving the Indian market, it would have been hard to make that. So we kind of decided to spearhead digital marketing and bookkeeping. And that was partially because my brother Tim had been working for a bookkeeping company, and the other guy was moving with us, had some marketing experience. So it was kind of, obviously I was doing lawn care, which is, you can't do that very well remotely. So that didn't translate very well. But those two services, Tim and Joe had some experience in, and but yeah, it seemed like kind of an obvious choice if you're trying to outsource something, especially primarily serving the Conservative Anabaptist Business Network, which was our social network. And so we moved to India. We started two companies. We had to start two companies because of the tax regulations here, one digital marketing and one bookkeeping. And the bookkeeping just seemed like it was something that so many business owners were struggling with. And that's what really ended up taking off. Um, and I'll tell one story to demonstrate that. Recently I had a customer who was on the phone with me and was just in tears because of how overwhelming the bookkeeping mess that they had was. And so, and I, when I was doing lawn care, I felt the same kind of overwhelm at times before I learned how to do bookkeeping. Because as a business owner, like I had to get out there, and I didn't have many employees, so like operations was primarily on my shoulders. I had to do all the scheduling, which is really important in lawn care. It's low profit margins. You have to get a lot done in one day. And just all of the different responsibilities of running a company, bookkeeping just falls through the cracks. You get behind on it. Generally, business owners do not enjoy it. And then what is really the straw that breaks the camel's back is when there's bookkeeping problems that come up that the business owner just doesn't know how to solve, whether it's some kind of glitch with QuickBooks, or just not knowing how to categorize things correctly. Richard, you are not I don't know if you were in tears or not. You're not the person I was referring to. Sorry, one of my customers just commented in the chat. Um, he had a similar experience when he came to me, but I was talking about someone else. So yeah, that feeling of overwhelm when you're able to step in and, now that I have experience in bookkeeping, and we have a team with much more experience than we have, as the owners, when we can step in as a team and solve that problem, help business owners who are so busy get time back for their families, because often this happens in the evenings, or their wife is doing it. It's taking time from their families, and just the stress. I think there's an element of fear to it too, because the IRS is connected to it. And whenever you get that letter from the IRS, like there's no fear like that letterhead. It's a special type of terrorism. And so because that's connected to messy books, the fear of an audit or fear of, just not filing correctly, or even, if you, a really common one is people just not writing off their business loan interest as an expense. There's these common mistakes where a business expense might go to your balance sheet instead of the profit and loss, and you don't write it off as an expense, and you lose a lot of money. So when you're able to offer value, give customers their time back, help get rid of that fear of the IRS or that they're just doing things wrong, and seeing people's business owners, just the joy it brings to them is it's a lot of fun. So yeah, offering that value, and then you get to build a relationship over time where you see every transaction that happens, and so you're an obvious pick if the business owner if the client wants to talk about ways to cut costs. Or I'm not a business coach. I'm not going to claim to be, because I'm in your presence. But there is some basic level consulting we can do. And it's really neat to see so many different companies, to get an inside picture on their companies. It's a real privilege that we don't take lightly. So yeah, it's once again, our company's pretty young. I'm still building those relationships with clients, but it's been really great experience.
Well, Titus, our time is just about up. I realized it's been a pretty quick hour here. Thank you so much for your contribution. And we'll take just a few moments. Any questions anyone has that'd like to ask Titus here in our last closing minutes, feel free to pop them in the chat. Audrey, if you have anything you've been a host here. This is host privileges now. If there's something you want to ask Titus before he drops off to sleep in India, now's the time as well.
Yeah, anyone, feel free to unmute or put your questions in the chat. I've got one here. So you talked about, what I think is really neat is that you've talked about how you're actually creating these places for community members to benefit from. So you're not just giving money to an organization that's already doing something. But if you were to kind of donate you know, how do you decide how much of your revenue or profit is going to go towards community support or community development?
Yeah. So we have a goal, a 10-year goal at our company that includes a certain amount of clients and a certain amount of community centers. So that's just, I mean, that's because Steve told us we need a 10-year goal. But it has been really inspiring to see that, to have that vision. And as far as like how much to donate,
Is it a percentage? Are you looking at like goals? I mean, I think speaking, you know, yeah, I think maybe the culture in India might be different than the culture where I'm from, you know, and so just thinking about like, oh, do you just donate to nonprofits, or are you, you know, what does that look like for you?
yeah, so it's really neat being here because we can actually visit the nonprofits we support and make sure they're being managed well, because there's a lot of fraud that happens in the nonprofit world. And because we're bookkeepers, naturally we set up bookkeeping for these nonprofits, and every donation and every expense that takes place in their organization is accounted for. And so that kind of financial accountability, yeah, it's really important for us. And then being able to just drop in and visit these organizations. But yeah, I mean, tithing is, I mean, that's a common practice in the church, and we probably don't have time to get into all that. But I think a wealthy business owner should be able to give more than 10%, whether it's from your company donating or just your personal donations. But that's a whole nother rabbit trail that I don't know if we have time to go down to.
Yeah,
Um,
probably not. Not just for fear, but out of practicality as well.
right,
The other thing I would just note, Audrey, in that question, and Titus, if I can insert my comments, that often there's a budgetary process that a company goes through, and when you have a financial projection, you know how much profit you need to keep in the business to sustainably grow it. And that's a stewardship question to be sure that you're caring for your people well, especially your finance person, so he doesn't have undue stress in his life because you're taking all your cash out of the business. But also just to have a healthy, flourishing business, you need to model that yourself. But then there is also additional profits that then become a discretionary disbursement of the owners. And I think I loved working with the Kuepfer brothers in putting their plan together because they were able to get this data together, and they saw a correlation between what a community center was, kind of what a cost was for a community center, how many clients they would have, and what the net profits they could use toward community centers, plus still run their business. And most businesses, when they have a clear kind of, here's what we do with our profits for human flourishing outside of the business world, there are ratios and relationships that can be scaled appropriately in that pathway. And I think in some ways yours, Titus, is much cleaner and simpler than many businesses. Maybe it's because you were intentional about it from the very start. But those are great conversations to have. And I would assume that number of clients and community center still inspires you, Titus.
right,
That's
absolutely.
And
that's
as the
great
number
insight,
of
Steve.
clients grows, you know that means number of community centers can grow as well, and
Right,
fire burns.
right.
Awesome. Well, Steve, do we want to talk
Fantastic.
about next webinars?
Yes, so our next webinar is coming up uh, Friday, April the 25th, again at 12 noon, and
And
the
then,
next second one in April 25th, 12 noon, and that's Eastern time, and May the 19th at 12 noon Eastern time as well. And we've got some great guests scheduled for at least one of those, I think.
yep, we've got some good guests coming up, and follow, if you don't already, go ahead and follow us on socials. So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're all available on there. And then if you haven't subscribed to our email, go ahead and subscribe to our email, and on our website, we'll be able to actually send you the Zoom connection link right to your email, so you don't have to go searching for it. So
And I would
thanks.
also add, these become YouTube videos.
Oh,
This will
yes,
be
and YouTube.
live on YouTube here within probably the next 24 hours.
That's
And feel
great.
free to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can always go back and find those. updates as we keep building more content there as well.
Good point, Steve. Titus, thanks
you
so
so
much
much
for
for
joining
joining us,
us
folks.
today.
Yeah. Thank you, Audrey. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great
Titus.
day, everyone. Thank you.